Good evening. What an amazing lineup of speakers tonight. It's an honor and a privilege to be the visionary sponsor of the 2017 SUD Talks. My name is Drew Rothermel, and I'm the President and CEO of Origins Behavioral Healthcare. We are a nationally recognized addiction treatment organization with 6 facilities between Florida and Texas. The Hanley Center is our flagship facility here in Palm Beach County. Origins is passionate about helping people get sober, and I know we do a particularly good job. We've also worked hard at involving ourselves in public conversations surrounding the national drug epidemic. Heather Hayes is equally passionate and doesn't shy away from this topic either. I've worked with Heather for many years, and I can say she is among the best of the best in the behavioral health and addictive disorders field, and she's one of the most committed people I've ever met. The title of Heather's visionary talk tonight is A Nation Taken Hostage. In fact, I believe that the present opioid crisis threatens to wipe out the productivity of an entire generation. Heather is the co-founder and CEO of Hayes Davidson and Associates. She's a master's level licensed counselor and board registered interventionist. She's a graduate of Emory University, and she has an MED from Antioch University in counseling psychology. Help me welcome tonight's Origins visionary speaker, Heather Hayes.
Please welcome visionary speaker, Heather Hayes.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you. First off, thank you, Origins. Thank you, Drew, for having me tonight. And I just am so grateful to be here. And seeing what the Delray Task Force does, it's amazing. And Suzanne, I really want to thank you for putting your absolute heart and soul into these SUD Talks. So I am honored to be a visionary speaker tonight. So I want to talk tonight about a nation taken hostage. And I'm going to take you through, I'm going to start and go a little bit through my addiction and how I went from an addict into an interventionist. I'm going to go from there and talk about the hostage negotiations field, literally and figuratively. And I want to look at the biggest terrorist we have today, and that's addiction. I'm a licensed counselor. This is the part I get the most emotional about. I'm a licensed counselor. I'm an educational consultant. I'm an international certified hostage negotiator. I don't get emotional about that. I'm a wife. I'm an equestrian. And I'm a person in long-term recovery. Last week, I celebrated 35 years of continuous recovery. So I'm grateful. So having been clean 35 years, I got sober young. I was 21 years old. And by the time I was 21 years old, I was already a full-blown addict. The majority of my story and my addiction is the story of a teen and a young adult. I went off to college to University of Georgia and studied this. I went off to Georgia, and I was literally already this disease had gotten me. And I want to tell you a few things about that young woman with the beer bong in her mouth. She went to some of the finest private schools in the South. My grandfather was a United States Senator. He was also a very well-known newspaper publisher. My uncle was the Latin American correspondent for the Huntley Brinkley Show during the 60s. My father was an archaeologist and taught theology for his entire career. I was bright, still am. I rode horses all over the country competitively. And yet, coming from a good home, good smarts, I was a full-blown addict by the time I would venture to say 16. I went off to University of Georgia, and I thought somehow that if I changed my major to psychology, it would help me quit doing that so much, drinking and doing so many drugs. And I guess in some ways it did. I didn't get sober right away, but I ended up in treatment. And I can remember distinctly in my first psychology class, when I went in and they put up on the board, they were talking about addiction, a list of questions. Have you ever had more to drink than you intended to? Yeah. Do you ever feel remorseful or horrific about the things you did when you were drinking, doing drugs? Yeah. Did you ever use more than you intended to? I went through the list and I had almost all yeses. And when I got to the bottom, it said, if you say yes to 2 of these questions, you might have a problem. If you say yes to 3 or more, you're definitely an addict. And my first thought was, can I take the test over again now that I know that it's at the bottom? So I wish I could tell you that was my aha moment, but it wasn't. I went through a lot more. I left University of Georgia, I had a 1.19 GPA. I literally went to the wrong class. I didn't go that much, but I literally went to the wrong class. And this is, I don't know about you guys, but in my addiction, I was pretty entitled. I was pretty self-centered, and everything was everybody else's fault. So trying to be helpful, I went in for the midterm and literally went up to the professor and let him know that he'd put the wrong number on the test. And he informed me that he was not confused about where he was. Me, on the other hand. So I got a D in that class after he added me, and an F in the class I didn't show up for. I'm going to take her down. So it was 1982, and I went into treatment into one of the few places available for me to go. They treated addicted physicians. I got there. I was the youngest one. I wasn't a physician. But within about 2 to 3 weeks, and I truly believe that's the power of brain chemistry clearing, I knew that I was going to be dead if I didn't get clean. And from that point on, I did everything I needed to do. Some days were hard, some days were miserable, but I knew if I just put one step in front of the other and just didn't use no matter what, it would be okay. I continued to study psychology, and I knew from the beginning that my calling, my passion, was to be a counselor. And I loved and still love the adolescent, young adult population, partially because of my own history. I went off to graduate school. I went to Emory. I got my 1.19 University of Georgia, Emory, 3.9 with honors. And if that's not the gift of recovery right there, I don't know what is. Went off to Boston to graduate school where I, during my internship in 1986, worked with heroin addicts out of the Boston projects. Heroin's been here an awful long time. Came back. I've had an amazing career. I have studied with some of the greatest. I've studied Ericksonian therapy, experiential therapies, play therapy. I have literally had the ability to work with some of the masters out there in the field and consider myself blessed, and it's a huge part of that's made me who I am today. Today, I primarily work as an interventionist. I'm based out of Atlanta, and in my 33-year career, I have probably seen about 3,000 families. I have seen a lot of people get better and recover. I've also suffered the losses, and that's been hard. In 2001, I ran into the head of our hostage negotiation team in my county, and we struck up a conversation, and he told me that they were looking for a psychological profiler, and would I be interested? Work for the cops? What, me? I couldn't believe it. And the next thing I knew, I'd gone to FBI school. I had trained with some of the greatest in the hostage negotiation field, and I was a certified international hostage negotiator. We work hard. We train a lot. We come together, we go out, we get called out, often in the middle of the night. Just got called out 3 weeks ago, 2:30 a.m. with a suicidal guy and a gun in his mouth in a car at McDonald's. We get called out for suicides, barricaded gunmen, domestic disputes that have gone bad, burglaries gone bad, The stakes are high. Lives are on the line. It's very stressful. And as stressful as it is going out on a hostage call-out, interventions are almost more stressful. As a negotiator, I learned that a hostage is a person that's held against their will. They have captors or terrorists that have power over them. It's traumatizing. It's painful. Lives are at stake. It's a life-threatening situation. There were several incidents that had happened historically that came together for New York Police Department, NYPD, to decide to begin to evaluate whether or not the use of violence in hostage situations was beneficial or not. I want to tell you a little bit about them, just to give you a little bit of history. So the first, September 1971, Attica Prison, Attica, New York. Attica Prison houses 1,200 inmates. One morning about 8:45, several of the inmates overpowered one of the prison guards. Quickly, they were able to break down a damaged door, and within minutes, they had taken over the master control of the entire prison. It didn't just happen that day, it had been building. Tensions in the prison had been building for months. But within 15 minutes, 42 civilians and prison guards were taken hostage. The hostage situation lasted for 4 days. Almost immediately, the governor got involved, politician gets involved. That's what happens when you have hostage situations. High stress, high profile. The hostage takers had a list of demands. They wanted the superintendent gone, amnesty for the people who had taken over the prison. They wanted better food, religious freedom, better rehabilitation, and interestingly, they wanted drug and alcohol rehab available to them. 4 days into the standoff, the governor decided that they were going to go tactical. At 10 o'clock in the morning, police and prison guards stormed the prison, and within 15 minutes, 10 hostages were dead, 29 inmates were dead, and 89 were seriously wounded. This was one of the biggest incidents in prisons and jails. In fact, there was a lawsuit that didn't get settled until 2000, almost 30 years later. There were major prison reforms that happened because of this situation. All jails and prisons now have to have a staff trained in negotiations. But it shows us the long effects of mishandling a situation. The inmates, their families were all awarded, they were awarded $8 million and their attorneys $4 million, so $12 million total. Probably one of the most high-profile, well-known terrorist incidents, Munich, 1972 at the Olympics. 8 PLO terrorists invade the Olympic housing. Within minutes, they've taken 11 Israeli athletes hostage and killed 2 right away. Their demands were extreme. They wanted 200 prisoners immediately released from jails in Israel and transported to Egypt. When the Munich police began trying to talk with them and negotiate, they actually came in and said, "We'll give you all the money you want." The terrorists said, "We don't care about money and we don't care about our own lives." And in fact, they saw the Munich police is trying to talk with them about it as they're stalling. So they immediately said, "We want transportation out of here right away or we're going to start killing athletes 2 at a time." So helicopters were brought into the Olympic compound and the terrorists and the hostages were flown to the Munich airport. They landed at the Munich airport and 4 terrorists took several of the hostages and began walking towards the airplane, leaving the others behind in a helicopter. The order was given for a sniper to shoot, and he missed. Immediately, a hand grenade was popped by one of the terrorists, thrown into the helicopter. It blew up, gunfire ignited, and within 5 minutes, all 11 hostages were killed, 5 PLO terrorists, and a police officer. The next situation I want to talk to you about gave rise to the term of the psychological phenomena that happens when captors take over their hostages and trauma happens, and it's called the Stockholm Syndrome. 1973, Stockholm, Sweden. A bank is having their morning routine, and all of a sudden it's just disrupted by gunshot fire. Look over, and here's this lone gunman, Jan Erik Olsson, who is a prisoner who is on furlough from prison. Gunfire everywhere, screams out in English, the party has just begun. He takes 4 hostages, 3 women and a man. And then because it was disruptive, they go into the vault, and for 6 days, he keeps them hostage in the vault. His first demand is that his prison cellmate get released and come join him, which they had happen. Now, what they didn't know, Jan and the other captor, was that the Swedish police, you can actually see on the slide, had a way to look through and drill, and they could see into what was happening in the vault. And as they watched, they began to notice some interesting dynamics. By the second day, the captors and the hostages were all on first-name basis. And they began to notice that the hostage takers, the terrorists, were actually even at times seen comforting the hostages. One woman was extremely claustrophobic. They're in a vault. So the captors decided that they would let her go for a walk on the end of this long rope outside of the vault. She later said that she felt it was so kind of them to let her take this walk on a leash, and felt like they were really kind. By the 4th day, when they spoke to the authorities, the hostages said that they were more concerned that they were going to be harmed by the police than by their hostage takers. Day 6, when they're finally released, they begged that nothing happened to the hostage takers. They refused to testify against them in court. They kept in touch with them up until their hearing. And it's even been, different reports say that they even helped raise money for their defense. This shows the psychological dynamic that can happen with people when they're under extreme stress. So NYPD's response to all of these events and others was that they needed to come together and find a way to deal with hostages in these situations where there wasn't violence involved. And they ended up developing what law enforcement refers to as the most effective nonviolent tool that they have. It was started by 2 NYPD police officers, Harvey Schlossberg, who was a detective and had a PhD in psychology, and Frank Blotz. And they came together and they put together some tactics that they felt would be best used in hostage situations. See, when you have a situation like Munich, you have 4 choices. You can go by assault, you can use chemical agents, you can use sniper fire, or you can contain and negotiate. Containing and negotiating is the safest way to go. They believed that it was important to slow things down, and it was vital that you understand the behavior, the incident, in the context of what was going on, that all behavior is explainable, and that we needed to stop and figure out exactly why this was happening and how to make sense out of it. The other main principle in hostage negotiations is that there are 0 acceptable losses. 0. This is a philosophy that we need to bring over into the addiction world. 0 acceptable losses. As I sat in negotiator class listening to all of the dynamics, everything sounded so familiar. Once you have a terror attack, nothing is ever the same. After 9/11, we never walked through our airports in the same way. Once you have addiction in your family, or you lose a loved one to a heroin overdose, nothing is ever the same. Hostage takers have control over the people they capture. Addiction takes control over our minds, over our individuals, over our families, over our communities. Zero acceptable losses. Hostages get Stockholm syndrome. Isn't that what we talk about with what happens to families when they're under an enormous amount of life-threatening stress, but we call it enabling? We come in and we say, look, you need to learn how to support health, not demise. We're going to help you learn how to do that. And suddenly it hit me. We're under attack. And our attacker is addiction. We get freaked out about jalapeno peppers with salmonella in them. We hear that on TV, and people are running to the grocery stores. They're pulling them off the shelves. We're taking them out of our refrigerator. But we have more people dying from addiction than we ever did jalapeno peppers. We have Ebola screenings at the airport. We have had more people die of addiction than we've ever had die in the United States of Ebola. And yet, our kids go to school and they do fire drills and they do tornado drills. And believe you me, in 2017, they do terror drills. Where are our addiction drills? Because it's far more likely to kill our children. We are under attack. The CDC tells us that we are losing 91 individuals a day to opiate overdoses. In 2015, we lost 33,000 Americans to opiate overdoses. That's half the size of the city of Delray. 52,000 people died if you just consider overdoses. That's almost the size of the city of Delray. We have 23.5 million people who are addicted in the United States today. That is roughly the size of the state of Texas. And only 11% of them are going to get help. The American Society for Interventional Pain Physicians tells us that there are 17 states out there where more people have died of prescription pill overdoses than car accidents. Every day, 2,500 of our children try prescription pills to get high. Did you hear that? 2,500 a day for the first time try prescription pills to get high. 1 in 7 got high in the last year, and 60% of them are under the age of 15. Did you see those beautiful children we had on stage a little while ago? In the United States, we consume 80% of all the world's opiates, and yet we are 4.6% of the world's population. And we consume 2/3 of the world's illegal drugs. And that's just drugs. What about alcohol? 88,000 people a year are dying of alcohol-related deaths. And those are the ones who get it marked down as an alcohol-related death, not the ones who are drinking and fall and crack their head and then it doesn't get taken down that way. And what about our children? 1 in 4 live with or have an addictive relative. 32% of the people that are of the children that are in foster care are there directly because of substance abuse. 80% of all child abuse cases were linked to substance abuse. We are under attack. We should have sirens going off. We've got sleeper cells in our homes, looming, waiting to pop up. And yet, where are the sirens? Where is the alarm? This is Connor Eckhart, taking his last few breaths of life. He'd been sober 8.5 months, and he took 1 hit of spice, and it swelled his brain, and he never came back. No parent should ever, ever have to lose a child like this. It's just too painful. So I ask, why? Why aren't the alarms going out? What is it that we can have this terrorist living amongst us in our homes, in our places of worship, in our schools, in our communities, like sleeper cells right there, and yet we don't have the National Guard out to do everything we can possibly do to stop them? Is it our ideology? Is it that we live in a chemical culture? Do we step back and we say, hey, you got a headache? Take a pill. In fact, take an extra strength pill. That'll be better. There's a chemical answer to everything. Having fun? You can have a better time. Drink this beer. You will be cuter, funny, smarter, sexier. You'll have a better time. In fact, you know, there's a morning show that comes on. And on this show, every morning, they have glasses of wine sitting right there. And I look at that and I think about ideology and I say, what are we doing? Like, have you ever seen a person in late stage alcoholism who has to drink in the morning? It's one of the most painful things. They grab the glass as best they can, shaking, trembling, waiting to just get that sip in so that they don't go into withdrawals. They take that sip, and it usually goes down and comes right back up, and right back down, and right back up, until they can finally get it down, and the shaking stops a little bit. There is nothing sexy about a person who has to drink in the morning. How do we glamorize a disease? Would we glamorize the symptoms of diabetes, leukemia? We have to stop and look at our ideology, why it means so much to us. Or is it the stigma? Is that the terrorist? Is it the stigma that we think that it's only the homeless people, it's only people who are shooting up in alleyways, that a person who's addicted isn't a high school honor student or a college athlete or a pilot or an attorney or your mother or your grandfather? Do we forget that that's what it looks like? Is it so bad? We have so much judgment around this disease that we don't even want to say we have it. So instead, we make it a bad thing. We can't see it. Is that what's happening? I started out my career working in a facility where we treated primarily addicted physicians, that helped me to begin to step back and say, okay, addiction really doesn't look like what I thought it looked like. Here was a group of individuals who were smart. They'd done everything they'd put their minds to, except for to be able to control their addiction. My first client was a neurosurgeon and a Demerol addict. He shot up Demerol and he went into the operating room and he operated on Miss Jones. And no one in the OR knew he was impaired. He left, and then he came back 4 hours later and he said, I'm ready to operate on Miss Jones, let's scrub. And aghast, the OR nurse said, you already operated on Miss Jones. He was in treatment the next day. But addiction looks like some of our highest functioning individuals out there. So is it the stigma? Is that what stops us? The heroin epidemic has tragically held up a mirror to the affluent society. And now we see it's in our neighborhoods. It's in our suburbs. I don't do interventions in the projects. I'm working in Beverly Hills, Palm Beach, Upper East Side, Buckhead. That's where I'm working. It's affecting everybody. I will never forget the day I had a phone call from a mother who called me. She was also a physician. She'd come home from lunch and found her 15-year-old son dead of a heroin overdose on the floor. And next to him, just a couple years older than her son, was his drug dealer, still breathing. She revived the dealer, and she couldn't save her own son. This is what addiction is doing, and there are no words to comfort. We should have vigils where we are standing out until this terrorist is out of our lives. Is it the perception? Is that what stops us from really seeing it? You know, sometimes it gets difficult. Who's got it? How'd it get here? You know, we know addiction takes the brain hostage. The dopamine system is hijacked, and the drug becomes the #1 coping mechanism for the brain. Individuals are taken hostage. They're hijacked. They don't have access to their frontal cortex, so they can't manage their cravings, and they look like they don't have morals or values or know the difference between right or wrong. Yet we know that people who are addicted can be some of the kindest, sweetest, most caring people out there. But they lose those assets when they're high. And the families are taken hostage. The families end up, they can't think straight either. It's almost, again, like Stockholm Syndrome. And we, in the addiction field, we've terrorized the families. We want to focus on their deficits, not their strengths. The worst words you can call somebody is enabler. We have come in and pathologized our families for struggling with living with an individual who is dying in front of their very eyes, life-threatening situation, and yet they're dealing the best they can with their own post-traumatic stress disorder to manage, and they're susceptible to manipulation. They're susceptible. They have a fierce, loving protection, and everything gets all mixed up. I had a mother who sat for 3 days in a parking lot outside of a hotel, in a rental car, in a wig, and her son was inside that hotel on a cocaine binge. And somehow she thought that if she was in the parking lot, she would help be able to save him. I've had mothers go and buy drugs for their kids because somehow they believed that that would keep them safer than if they went and got them themselves. This is how impaired the thinking gets under stress for families. They need help too. But they need help for post-traumatic stress disorder because that's what they've got. And so do our first responders and our medical people. The other thing I think about when I think about perception is, have we not educated everybody well enough? I mean, we know everything. We know more today about the brain, the signs and symptoms, how to diagnose. We've got evidence-based treatment that works. Have we not helped the communities to see, helped our first responders, helped our families know this is what it looks like? We know who's high risk. We've got globs and globs of research. Why aren't we helping these high-risk individuals? We'll keep them away from those jalapeno peppers. I mean, we are under attack. Addiction cannot cause so much fear that we are simply resigned to its existence. We just can't let it. If you sit through this talk and you leave and you don't do anything, well, nothing will change. But we have an opportunity to come together and pull together and make things change. We can't just sit around and talk about how awful the war is and how bad it is and how much we don't like the fact that we're at war. It is time to strap on our boots and get out there and fight and use everything that we've got to stop this terrorist. We know more in 2017 than we ever knew. A lot more than we knew 35 years ago about what parts of the brain are affected by addiction. We've got evidence-based protocols that we know work. We have 23 million people in recovery. Is that amazing? We have almost 200 colleges that have collegiate recovery campuses for our students who are in recovery who want to go and get sober. There's hope. We have to spread the hope. We've got to stop and look at what we've done right and what's working. We've also got to rally together and insist that we treat people with this disease with the same respect that we would treat anyone with any other disease, the same respect and the same dignity. Our individuals struggling with addiction deserve that. We need to go in and educate and get as absolutely as informed as we possibly can. And these conversations have to begin at home, at our dinner tables. Our children have to know what addiction looks like, what this terrorist looks like, even if that means that we grown-ups have to look at our own relationship with that terrorist. Because kids cannot believe that it is disgraceful to go and get help when you get in trouble. They have got to know that it's an illness. We have got to regulate this industry. We cannot stand for patient brokers, insurance fraud, P-scams, call centers that flood the internet. The individuals struggling, family members are vulnerable. We have to protect them. They have to know that when they get placed into treatment, it's because it's the right place for them to go, not because some unethical provider is padding their pockets. We have got to stand up for that. We've also got to begin to quit locking so many of our addicts away. We've done a lot with drug courts and alternative sentencing, but we can do more. We've got to offer more services. A disgraceful 85% of our prisoners either are in because of substance abuse or have a substance abuse history. We need to take these people and get them good treatment that works so that they can go back out and become productive members of society. We can no longer stand by and expect law enforcement to deal with this disease and clean this up. For too many years, for too long, we've stepped back and law enforcement's had to step in. It's not okay. So, I came up with a little acronym. I am going to ask that we all resist. And let me take you through that. We need to be respectful. We need to respect people with this disease with the same dignity that we would any other diseases. We need to be ethical. We need to break the stigma. We need to talk about it. We need to get out there. We need to share our stories. I had a mom that was coming to meet me for an intervention, and she was talking to the credit card company to authorize some charges, and she broke down on the phone and said to the woman on the other end of the line, "I'm so upset. My daughter's an addict, and I'm going to do an intervention." And the woman on the other line from the credit card company started crying and said, "So's my son. I'll be praying for you." We have to break the stigma. We have to share. We have got to be informed. We have got doctors that are addictionologists that do nothing but diagnose addiction. We know the signs and symptoms. We've got to get the information out there. We have to do a better job with that. We've got to support each other. We cannot do this alone. And we've got to offer treatment, not punish our addicts. We've got to expand our resources. We can do this. Thank you.
Please give a big hand to visionary speaker Heather Hayes and all our 2017 SUD Talks.